we'll continue then to march on. Okay, there we go. So let me ask you this question to start with. Are genealogies important?
Always.
Why?
It tells the past of who we are today and what took place during the times and how the teaching of what took place helps us in today.
There's a mic drop moment right there. You just summed up everything I wanted to have us be aware of. I have a nephew that's big into genealogies, and he's always exploring, and I got stuff that he doesn't have that I've sent him, and never get any feedback from him, but apparently he spends a lot of time researching family history, particularly from my mother's side of the family, which, if I understand correctly, my ancestors came from Germany and dropped people off all the way down the East Coast, all the way around into Louisiana area. And other than that, I don't know much about them. Except for, and I think I mentioned this before, there's some genealogy scholars on my mother's side who spend a lot of time researching the history in Shenandoah Valley, which is part of Clay County, Alabama. And so I've got a booklet about that thick that talks about all the relatives on that side. And it's kind of interesting when you tease those things apart. And we visited old graveyard once, and wooden tombstones still there, but you can't read what's on them. So it does have that sense of connection with things that have transpired in times past. I'm not a big fan into that. I got the book. I've read it a couple of times. It's interesting, particularly when you see the 12 little girls huddled around a huge pine tree, hand to hand as far as they could reach, and still couldn't quite make it all the way around the circumference of the tree until the turpentine harvesters came through and took all the pine trees down. I thought that was a little interesting story, but you know, that's a connection to the past of Clay County, Shenandoah Valley, and Catch Me Doggy Creek, which was the creek that they lived next to. So why are genealogies important to the Jews? Let's tease this part apart a little bit more, Tony. But you don't have to. I mean, I'm just not relying on you for that answer, but anybody can chime in. It's just not me and Tony here today. Why were genealogies important to the Jews?
The claim of being the seed of Abraham.
Why was that important?
Because they were the chosen people by God.
Okay, so and that connection is important to us. How?
Messiah came through.
Thank you so much. The Messiah came through Abraham.
Did you notice that it should be very important to you because Gene, your name isn't there?
What is another reason that genealogies are important to the Jews? It's not about me.
The Levitical,
Not about me.
the Levitical priesthood was pretty heavily monitored.
Very heavily monitored, but not just the Levitical priesthood. All of the lineages back to the 12 was important for another reason.
Because of the birthright, for one thing.
Birthright, which means what? In terms of, oh, how do I put my hands around this?
Well, whoever was born first gets the most, and then,
Get the most what?
whatever the family owned.
Okay, so we take this connection and look at this connection. The land was divided by tribes. The tribes were divided by, what's the word? No, there's tribes here, there's this thing right here, and it's all in the lineages, and now that word just escapes me. I want to say it starts with an S, but I can't even validate that now. But you could only get property based on where you fell in that lineage process. And so when the Jews got captivated and came back, they could only establish themselves in the land if they could show their lineage back to their forefathers, to the tribes. So I think Tony's absolutely right. In the bigger picture for us today, it's all the generational linking pins of history that come together in the Bible histories and the frameworks and characters of the Old Testament that put everything in alignment so that we can really understand the linkage between Jesus and Abraham, and Jesus and Adam 1, because Jesus is Adam 2. right? As we have said. So the other interesting thing about that, it really does help us separate legend from history. And we like to tease out the history part because legend can take us in a lot of different directions. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. 1 Chronicles 9:1. So all Israel was enrolled by genealogies, and behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel. And Judah was carried away into exile to Babylon for their unfaithfulness. When they came back, then they had to establish their property rights based on their ability to find the records and say, yea, verily, this was not word of mouth stuff as much as it was, can you show us the documentation? Nehemiah was particularly interested in that in Nehemiah 7 verse 5. It's written, then my God put it in my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the people to be enrolled by genealogies. And then I found the book of genealogies of those who came up first, in which I found the following record. And it goes on from there. So they're gone for 70 years. And this book is still available. I think that's pretty interesting how they captured that stuff. In chapter 7, verse 64, they searched among their ancestral registrations, but it could not be located there. They were considered unclean. And there was then this caveat, and excluded from the priesthood until there was a new high priest. So all this was lost. Ultimately, all that genealogy, history, records, was lost when Titus comes through Jerusalem and kind of burns everything, about AD 70. And from that day on, there has never been a true high priest. Because nobody could say, I really am from Levi. The other piece of that, though, is since Titus did that with all those genealogies, there's no way to show that there can be any other Messiah but the one who is Messiah. Because there's no records of anybody that can trace back to Abraham. It's all gone. So, our ancestors, this is an interesting little quote from R.B. Sheraton in the book called The Rivals. Listen, our ancestors are very good kind of folk, but they are the last people I should choose to have as visiting acquaintances. I don't know if you've got ancestors like that, but I'm not sure I do. But we could digress real quickly with that, couldn't we? Okay, let's see. That's coming up twice. So, what do we understand about the lineages in Matthew and Luke's account? What's there, what's not there?
They don't list every single person, right, in the lineage. I mean, it's patriarchal, it's listed by the men, but they.
Listed by who?
The men.
So who's left out?
The women.
Oh, okay. What I was hoping you were trying to say.
Well, there you go. You're welcome.
But there are some apparent gaps in there. We think, or maybe we don't think. Matthew only goes back to Abraham, and Luke goes back to Adam. Why the two differences? Who was Matthew addressing his description to? Who is Matthew written for? Starts with a J, ends with an S, has two letters in between. The Jews. And since he only goes back to Abraham, Abraham is the father of Israel. Okay, father of the faithful, as we understand it in the bigger picture. Luke goes back to Adam, so that who else is included? Gentiles. Now, you could make a case that said, wait a minute, Noah is really the father of all Gentiles and Jews. Abraham is the father of Jews physically, and Gentiles, how so?
Of the promise
What promise?
made to Abraham, God's promise to Abraham.
Please continue. And then I won't have to preach today.
Stop there, stop.
everybody else wants a break. Maybe a long one again today. I said that last week and everybody said, well, can you count the stars at evening when the sun goes down? Count the stars. Look at Deuteronomy 1 verse 9. Who else said, you're more than the stars? His name was not Amos, but raised up a child of the cloth. They called him Amos. Oh man, where's you guys?
I don't know.
Hillbilly,
We can't read you.
Hillbilly Rock. Amos Moses. Tim's biting his lip over there. He knows what. Okay, so it was Moses that said, look at you. We're about to enter this land of promise after you've stumbled and fell so many times. You're more numerous than the stars of heaven, as God promised Abraham when he first made the covenant with him. But we also know that the rest of that covenant was all nations will be, which is beyond Judaism. Whew, it seemed to be hard. And what do we know about Jesus? Who did he come? What did he come for? Seek and save the lost, sinners of every gender, every race, every nation. And so when you look at those genealogies of Jesus, both Matthew and Luke's, you not only see the good, you see the bad and the ugly. Because the history is such that we are not lily white, pure, and lamb-like. You're so beautiful to me. I'm always encouraged when I see your face.
Amen.
Because it's just that much more, and I get a smile. Thank you so much. So Jesus is here for the sinners, came for the sinners and the Gentiles, and that may be synonymous, but we'll work on that. Okay, so two genealogies. The first one, Matthew 1 through 17, and Luke is 3:23 through 38, if you want to kind of look at that. Now, Matthew lists his, when you look at that quickly, you'll see one of the opening verses says something about 14s. Because there are three groups of 14s as Matthew describes the genealogy of Jesus back to Abraham. What is significant about 14? Think of 2 times 7. 2 is it takes 2 to bring up accusation. 2 witnesses, right? Here are 2 witnesses, then times 4, times 7, which is kind of the completeness, wholeness thing. So those, back, where's Kevin when I need him? Back to the numerology stuff. Matthew has 3 sets of 2 times 7, and 3 is always representative of heavenly and divinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, and all the things that where numbers are used to represent something beyond that. And so you kind of just gloss over those things until you start listening to Kevin and every number has some significance. And so Matthew does these 3 groups of 14. Now, Matthew also omits several names because the begets kind of say, but we can roll that up, okay? We can roll that up. The son of Jesse is David. The son of David is Solomon. But also we could say that the son of Jesse is Solomon. That's how we do those. That's how Matthew does this game. Addresses the meeting point of the lineage of Joseph and Mary. And so as you look at Luke, he will also ultimately say, I think it's in the 4th chapter, we'll look at in a minute. Mary and Joseph, the supposed father of Jesus. Which is an interesting phraseology that really says he wasn't the father, God was the father. Now, if you look at Matthew's number 38, you can do this counting on your leisure, and Mathat in Luke's number 71, if those are the same people, then all of a sudden these two genealogies come together. They're overlapping at that point. Because it would mean that, and this is really nerdy, Jacob and Heel, H-E-I-L, were brothers. And if that's true, then Joseph and Mary are related. And if that's true, there is no issue with the lineage going back to Abraham or the lineage going back to, there is no corruption in the genealogies. It goes back through Judah. Okay, so anyway, W.G. Scroggie says this about all this. Luke tells us that Joseph was the son of Heli, spells it a little different, and is conjectured with probability that Mary was the daughter of Jacob. It is assumed that Jacob, having no son, adopted Joseph, his nephew and heir. We see that Mary married a relative, and that she, as well as Joseph, was descended from David, Joseph in the line of Solomon, and Mary, his wife, in the line of Nathan. So I don't expect you to grasp that all of a sudden, because I haven't grasped it completely and fully. But there is significant indications that they were related. Doesn't mean that they were brother and sister. It means they were distant cousins. Okay. Everybody happy?
But during this time period, when Joseph and Mary were betrothed to each other, there was an overwhelming sense of keeping your property within your family line, and there was an overt effort to make sure that individuals married within their families. When I say within their families, within their extended families, so similar to Jacob, having to go back and find, found his wife Rebecca through the fact that it was his father's cousin.
Yeah. And the command is to marry within Israel, not necessarily to marry within the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
There was a tendency to do that.
Because of the property.
Because of property. But there were exceptions because of the one tribe that had the family lineage that ended up with daughters, and all of a sudden we got an issue, and God makes, let's clarify this little law we got going on about this lineage process. The other interesting thing is the parents of John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
The father was a priest, which means he was a, well, how could he be a cousin if his father was a Levite? It's not hard. His mother was from the tribe of Judah. So there were tribal intermarriages, but the lineage was traced through the male for property rights. Okay, that was really a nice digression that I didn't expect. Why two lists? Both give descendants of Joseph. Matthew's is the actual and real. Luke's is the legal. So you can look at, okay, here's what really happened in Matthew, and Luke says, this is what it means relative to the law, and relative to the property transfer rights. Matthew presents Jesus as a successor to the throne of David. Luke has the actual parentage, with the little caveat that Joseph, though he may have been related to Mary, was supposedly the father of Jesus. But we know from all accounts, Matthew and Luke, that God intervened and Jesus was born of the Spirit. Matthew gives legal descent of Joseph as successor to the throne. Luke the descent of Mary. And so, okay, we're having some real fun here. And we talked about two already, confirmation. Here's the examples of the old law around that. In Deuteronomy 19:15, a single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. So if you're going to bring somebody up on charges, it takes 2 witnesses as a minimum. Matthew has 1 witness, Luke has 1 witness. Job 33 verse 14. Indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. 2 witnesses, he speaks twice. Psalm 62:11 also adds to that. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God. And so it's reinforcing this idea of two witnesses. Okay, so two lists, one from Abraham, one from Adam. And when you think about that, we go back to where we started. The whole process of restoring fellowship with God was part of the original plan. That's why you're able to trace Jesus back to Adam. Because God knew what man would do. God knew that man would need some way, some method that maintained him as holy, but allowed access for man to be restored to fellowship with him. And it started before time. This is not happenstance. This is divine plan. And it's all designed to unfold over these thousands of years, because Abraham is that key player that says, through all nations, you will bless all nations through this covenant. 2,000 years, plus or minus, before Jesus was anything but a gleam in Mary's eyes, head, heart, before the Spirit spoke to her and said, you're the one, you're the only one that will bear this child of God. About 1,000 years prior to David, oh, by the way, so 1,000-year gap between Abraham and David, round numbers, and then from David to the birth. So we're still fresh and new in terms of what science says. Luke carries us from Adam 1 to Adam 2, and he also carries us from the natural man to the spiritual man. Adam 1, head of the human race. Adam 2, head of the spiritual human kind, redeemed people, his church. Because in Adam 1, we are destined to die. And in Adam 2, we are made alive for all time. For all time. And not in this worn out piece of junk, but in something that is in the form of Jesus. Okay, so the Old Testament begins with Genesis, meaning generation. The New Testament begins with the generation of restoration with Jesus. Kind of interesting. The Old Testament, if you look at Malachi 4, verse 6, ends with a curse. The New Testament begins with, that curse is broken through Jesus. How this stuff fits together is just amazing across all these years and through it's God's hand on everything that's going on. Deuteronomy 21:23 tells us that Adam brought the curse, Adam 1, Genesis 3:17. Then through Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. If you continue on then in Deuteronomy 21, verse 23, his corpse shall not hang all night on the tree, but you shall surely bury him on the same day. This is a punishment of death by whatever means the tree's involved. Bury him on the same day, for he who is hanged is accursed of God, so that you do not defile your land, which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. Thorns are used as an emblem of a curse. And who else wore a crown of thorns?
Jesus.
The curse is broken through Jesus. Who else was hung on a tree? Jesus, yes? He's crucified on a wooden cross with the thorns crowned on his head. Amazing, the imagery, the types and the antitypes that are throughout the Testaments. Stop me if you got something really cool to say, or I'll just ramble on all morning. Because this is just a fascinating way that all this is put together for us to understand.
She doesn't.
Pardon me?
Do the Jews still bury the dead on the same day they die? Do they do that in modern era?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. I'll have to do a little research. So don't hesitate to jack me up next week and say, what, or week after next. Say, hey, for the benefit of the class, what'd you find out? Or you could research that, Donna, and share with us too. We could confirm each other. We'd have two witnesses then. Your research and my research. I love how this works.
I've had several Jewish friends in the past, and I'm not gonna get this word correct, it's the sector that they belong to, that's still, and they were buried on the same day they died. And so, maybe not all do anymore, but I know that these particular friends, they did. Regardless of what your sister, brother, parent, whatever it was, they cover the mirrors and all kinds of things of what they believe.
A lot of traditions.
Yes. So,
So it depends on what sect.
well, it depends on.
There is no unity across Judaism anymore. There, like there ever was, but it's like he said, there are so many sects. S-E-C-T-S.
Yeah. And I have a couple of Jewish friends now. We talked about that, and they don't know each other, but I know them both. But one says, "I'm going to be cremated, but my parents would kill me." They don't believe in cremation.
What's that Harry Potter line? Harry, if we get out of this, if we die because of this, I'm gonna kill you. The other interesting thing about that, Diane, is that passage we read was being hung. Not that it's anything about natural death, it was just the hanging piece. Or be dying on a tree, for whatever factor that, whatever cause it might have been. Which means they would have better Absalom in the same day. But, somebody else has got that responsibility for you. I'm not gonna worry about it.
I know way back when, I have thought about this quite often, but I wonder, to desecrate and to give the worst kind of meaning to killing someone on the cross, and several of the gladiators and things of that way, why they didn't bury Christ upside down. Does that make sense to you? Because they would do that because it was a horrible, it meant you were just, they made him out to be, lower than.
Because they didn't bury him.
I meant to crucify.
I can't answer that question.
You're fired.
They didn't
But
hang,
you know what I'm
you get the impression they didn't hang the other two upside down either. So that,
The family
they may have reserved little things for different peoples, I don't know. But obviously the whole process was to create great agony and pain in the one being crucified. And so if the blood's in the head, what does that mean different to the blood in the feet? And, you have a headache because that's where all the blood is, or does it take away the head? I don't know. You know more about that stuff than I do.
It's a bloody system.
So it's your fault.
Well, that's okay.
Galatians 3, verse 13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. Thorns. Hanging. Having become a curse for us. Think about that. He was a curse for you and for me. Carried the curse of sin. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. Matthew 27:29, and after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand, and they knelt down before him and mocked him. You can also look at Mark 15:17 and John 19, 2 through 5, or 2 and 5, and more verbiage along that same line. It was a horrible death, but it was a death that was planned before there was time. Revelation 22, we go to the end. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. And therein is our eternal hope, because Jesus paid that price. Okay, back to the 14. We talked about this. 14 generations, 3 groups of 14 generations. And Matthew even talks about having those 3 14s, which is kind of interesting. Matthew 1:17, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, from David to deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. So he makes it a point to tell us, look, just count these things, which I did, and each one of them are 14, and there are 3 of them. And so there's something about that grouping that ought to flag to us that those numbers mean something.
I had a note in my Bible that some scholars think, and then some disagree, that,
No,
right?
say it ain't so.
That if you take the name David, in Hebrew, they use the same characters for letters and numbers. And if you take the letters from David and look at it as numbers, it also makes the number 14.
There's so much that you can tease out of so many things. And it's all planned by someone far wiser than Tom. I should say me.
Well, I think it's also important, I think what Tony's maybe trying to get at is that this death by crucifixion was a death that was designed to humiliate both the person being humiliated or the person being killed, and whatever it was that they stood for.
Mhm.
So, you know, we're aware because of what we're taught, you know, in Bible school and all this other stuff that you know, when Jesus was nailed to the cross, but crucifixion itself was, then the reason why they call it hanging was because most of the time a crucified person was merely tied and allowed to starve to death on the cross. I mean, that's why it was
That's
such
the
a
stage, yeah.
horrible way to go. And so, yes, Tony, you're right. It didn't matter how it was done because it was a horrible, horrible thing to be hung on a cross. It was a terrible, terrible way. It was a sentence of death, but it was also because you were naked. You were. I mean,
Sun beating down on you, burning your skin, even though you were dying.
it was a tough way to go.
Yeah. The other interesting thing was, what did the scribes and Pharisees request of Herod?
To break their legs.
Let's get this over with before the Sabbath, because we don't want hangings. This is still Jerusalem. We don't want hangings, crucified, to be there on the Sabbath day. A lot of things come together in this whole plan. The great thing about being the interim minister, preacher, teacher, whatever you want to call it, is it forces me to dig more than I've ever dug before. And it is very rewarding. And so I'm very thankful for this opportunity, which also has some other implications. When it's over, it's over. What do I do then? But, you know, we can talk about that later. Okay, so 14, we're all finished with that, talked about all that. Numbers, there are precedents for the 14 thing. Numbers 29:13, you shall present a burnt offering, an offering of by fire as a soothing aroma to the Lord. 13 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old, which are without defect. Perfected, complete, full. Nothing wrong with these lambs that are offered. What does that remind you of? Jesus, my Lord. Why am I singing so much today? 1 Kings 8:65. So Solomon observed the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great assembly from the interest of Hamath to the brook of Egypt before the Lord our God for 7 days and 7 more days, even 14 days. So this feast runs for 14 days. Another 14. Okay, so we talked about Abraham to David, 14 generations. Now think about that, from Abraham to David. What is happening in history from Abraham to David?
The advent of Jesus Christ.
Establishing a kingdom.
What kind of kingdom?
Well, it's messianic.
We're here, right? We're physical. So that whole process from Abraham to David is to establish that eternal kingdom, physical kingdom, which is the shadow, the type of the spiritual kingdom. The monarchy of Israel is the shadow of the monarchy of Jesus Christ eternally. The next generation from David to captivity. What do you think about there? Who's the principal players in that time? Who did the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles feature? throughout that period? Pardon me? David's gone. We're
Well,
past
the
David.
prophets were prophesying a lot about,
Who was mentioned over and over and over from Israel and from
yeah,
Judah?
the Savior, the King.
The kings, over. It's all about the kings. It's the history of the kings, right? And it's, the decline of Israel is represented in those kings, both on one side and both on the other. Judah and Benjamin and the rest of Israel. So there's this idea of kings foreshadowing an eternal kingdom, the monarchy. We talked about that. And then from, let's see, talked about, okay, Israel's decline, and then we have from captivity to Jesus. 14 generations. When you think about that, here I am in captivity. What do I want? I'm expecting. I have expectancy for something better than being captivated in this foreign land. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and we wept because we remembered. Take us back. How long, O Lord, will we be here? We know it's 7. Can you speed it up? Why 70 years? And throughout that time, we have really, the kings are gone. It's a hierarchy of priests that are running the nation. They're the mediators for everything that happens to the Israelis, to the Jewish people, because Israel is physically in ruins. And so who sets them free? God says, go back. Nehemiah says, I know I look a little downcast. It's because my city is in ruins. And the king says, go take care of it. And God starts working in man to get the captives back to their homeland that they so gloriously desired after being punished for their sins. That's the story throughout Numbers, by the way. From Matthew to David, 27 ancestors, only tracing through heirs to the throne. Heirs to the throne. That's that lineage that's in Matthew. And so when you look at that, here's back to your point, Sam. When you look at the heirs to the throne, there are heirs that are in that lineage that are not heirs to the throne. And so when that happens, Matthew skips down to the next in line to assume David's throne. And that's why there's some gaps, is because of the way he presents those. So he's only tracing the heirs of David that would have a right to say, I'm suitable to be king because I can go back to David. You can compare that with Deuteronomy 33 and Revelation 7, verses 4 and 8, by the way. Matthew writes for Jews, talked about that. Luke ties Jesus to Adam, the son of, pardon me? You almost said it.
God.
Son of God. Who else is the son of God? Jesus, right? So Adam 1, Adam 2. And we also know that Adam, through Noah, through Abraham, was the father of Gentiles. And Jesus called himself the son of man because he was there from Abraham, there from Adam, and reflected both Judaism and Gentiles in his message to all, one spiritual kingdom, accepting anyone obedient. Boy, this is good stuff. We may have to pass the plate after this session. Say it like that. Okay. Should put in $1. From Abraham to David, both of these genealogies listings are in agreement. Oh, by the way, Romans 5:19, for as through one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, even so through the obedience of the one many will be made righteous. Think about that. Adam took us into sin. Jesus takes us into eternity, righteousness. Luke talks about the physical descent through Jesus, or through the blood that Jesus had through Mary. Romans 1 verse 3, concerning a son who was born of a descendant of David according to the flesh. And Matthew is concerned with kingship. Luke concerned with humanity. Abraham, the natural father of Jesus, the spiritual father of Jew and Gentile. And they become united in the virgin birth and the deity of the Messiah, Son of Mary and Son of the Most High God. And I think about that right there. And I think about Mary having the interaction with the Spirit. And I'm just thinking, how in the world could she accept that? And it's just amazing to me that any human, even though we have examples throughout Old Testament, can have a conversation with God the Spirit. I kind of think I'd fall to pieces. Like the old song, I fall to pieces. Each time I think about Mary talking to God. Come on, Ken, that was I get sidetracked when I do that, don't I? Okay, Matthew, we talk about the Bible does not make Jesus Christ, oh yeah, here we go. The Bible does not make Jesus the Christ. Jesus the Christ makes the prophecies real. Jesus the Christ makes the prophecies meaningful to us. Jesus the Christ makes the prophecies important. Jesus Christ makes the prophecies tell us that he's the Son of God. And by doing that, by having an earthly mother and a spiritual father, he validates, authenticates, verifies everything that has been written that comes from God. Everything is recorded in his book. Look at the time. I got 2 minutes. What should we do? Hebrews 10:7. Therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me. In the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you have taken no pleasure. All that stuff, the old law, just really no joy for God. And then I said, behold, I have come, and the scroll of the book is written of me, to do your will. Now, with that in mind, go look at Psalms 40, verses 6 through 8, and you'll see that even David understood is a strong word. Even David had some recognition that Christ is both the beginning and the end. And not only the beginning and the end, he is also the end and the beginning. Which is a great place to stop for this morning. Final shots.
I wonder why more isn't told us of Joseph. You know, we hear Abraham believed and it was credited to him as righteousness. Joseph believed, he didn't divorce her. We hear David was a man after God's own heart because he pursued what he wanted. Seems to me that Joseph pursued what God wanted, took care of his boy. I just wonder why we don't hear more about Joseph.
Maybe the answer is in you. What difference would it make?
Well, if Abraham and David are examples,
Why would we need to know more about David or about Joseph than what we do?
I looked at the,
Why'd you do that to me?
I looked at the Jewish burial really quick, and the Jewish virtual library says that the law requires that he be buried within 24 hours, but it can be delayed for the preparation of the body or the arrival of relatives, but it can't be delayed past 3 days, and then it can't be performed on the first day of a festival.
Okay, so I don't have any homework.
There you go.
The interesting thing is, when you look at the traditions of Judaism, there's always this little, okay, but. Okay, but. So Tom, I would suggest we probably have revealed to us everything we need to know about Joseph. And when we really consider the implications, we have enough information to tease out that he was, one, a strong father, two, that he served his time well, and that the more we knew about him, the more we focus on him, and just think of what Catholicism has done with his mother. We'll stop there.
Thank you.
That's a song that's gonna be different for you from now on.
You know, I rewrote that poem once.
You did?
It's a book.
And then,
And then I gave it to the artist to transcribe it into pictures. But it has been done. So my version